In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where hundreds of civilizations thrive, there was one planet on the brink of destruction. Threxia, a world known for its advanced technology and peaceful nature, had fallen into chaos. A deadly plague, unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, had begun to spread across the planet. The Threxians, a species known for their wisdom and harmony, were now fighting for their lives. A distress signal echoed through the stars, reaching every known species and civilization in the galaxy. The message was simple but desperate. Help us. We are dying. No one else will listen. Please, we need your aid. The plea came from Queen Valorin, the leader of the Threxian people. She had sent this message to every known species in the galaxy, hoping for a response, any response. Yet, as the days passed, the answers she received were not what she had hoped for. The Xenar, a technologically advanced race known for their speed and intellect, dismissed the plea without a second thought. They believed it was a lost cause, a plague too deadly to risk exposure. The Vorexians, a powerful empire known for their strength, refused to intervene. They saw it as a waste of resources and didn't want to get involved in a war for a planet that couldn't protect itself. Even the Eldari, a race of ancient beings with vast knowledge, chose to turn away. They had seen too many civilizations fall, and in their cold wisdom, they decided it was not their place to save the Threxians. The message of the Threxians went unanswered, and their cries for help seemed to fade into the endless black void. But one civilization was different. Humanity, with its youthful energy and spirit, was still new to the galactic stage. They hadn't yet earned the reputation of the older, more established species, but they had something the others lacked: hope. Hope that no one should be left to perish, that every life had value, and that when others turned away, humans would stand up and answer the call. On Earth, a meeting was called at the United Earth Alliance, UEA, where representatives from different human colonies and Earth itself gathered. Commander Elena Harth, one of the brightest minds in the UEA, stood before the council, her face filled with determination. "The Threxians are reaching out for help," Elena said. "They need us. I understand the risks, I understand the doubts, but we cannot ignore their cry for help. This is a matter of life and death, and it is our responsibility to respond." The council members looked at each other, some unsure, others skeptical. Humanity was still new to the galactic community, and many feared that intervening could lead to dangerous consequences. There were talks of economic burdens, political backlash, and the risk of exposing humanity to a devastating plague. "We cannot afford to be seen as weak," said one council member. "If we help them, it might send the wrong message. The galaxy is already divided. We don't want to get involved in something that will harm our future." Elena's voice was steady but full of conviction. "Our future is built on the choices we make today. If we let an entire civilization fall simply because it's easier to turn away, what does that say about us? If we abandon them, what happens when we need help one day? Who will answer our call?" The room fell silent. The council members exchanged looks, but no one spoke up. It was clear that the decision wasn't easy, but Elena's words had struck a chord with some. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the head of the council stood up. "You're right, Commander Harth. Humanity has always been about rising above challenges. If we turn our backs now, we lose everything that makes us human. Prepare the arc horizon. We're going to Threxia." Elena's heart raced with excitement and fear. She had known this moment would come. She had known that the galaxy, full of vast and powerful species, might not come to the aid of a struggling civilization, but humanity would. And so, with a sense of purpose, the UEA set its course. The Arc Horizon, a state-of-the-art ship filled with scientists, medics, and engineers, was prepared for its mission. It was humanity's first real step into the galaxy's greater challenges. They were about to answer the call that everyone else had ignored. The Arc Horizon powered up, its engines humming with anticipation. As the ship prepared to leave Earth's orbit, Commander Harth stood at the bridge, staring out at the stars. They were heading into the unknown, to a world on the edge of destruction. The Threxians had asked for help, and humanity was ready to offer it, no matter the cost. The Ark Horizon drifted through space, its sleek design cutting through the dark emptiness between stars. Inside, the crew of humans worked with purpose, preparing for the unknown challenges they would face on Threxia. The journey was long, and the weight of their decision rested heavily on their shoulders. This was humanity's first mission outside of their solar system, and their success or failure would set the tone for future interactions with other civilizations. Commander Elena Harth stood at the bridge, gazing out at the stars. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on her. The entire crew was depending on her to guide them safely through this mission. She knew the risks. The Threxians were not the only ones who were struggling. Many species in the galaxy had their own problems, yet none of them had answered the distress call. She turned away from the window and looked at her crew. Each person had their own reasons for being on this mission. Chief Engineer Lucas Vasquez, a brilliant inventor, was overseeing the ship's systems with a focused expression. He had grown up hearing stories of how humanity had always stood up for the weak, and now he was part of something bigger than himself. Dr. Mara Owens, the ship's lead scientist, sat at a console in the corner, her eyes scanning the latest reports from the Threxians. She had worked tirelessly to understand the nature of the plague and develop a possible cure. She was passionate about saving lives, and she couldn't let this opportunity slip away. She had lost family members to a terrible disease in her youth, and now she wanted to make sure that others didn't have to suffer the same fate. Lieutenant Peter Grant, the ship's medic, walked over to Elena, his boots echoing on the metal floors. "Commander," he said, his voice calm but serious, "we've prepared the medical supplies, and the cure is ready to be administered as soon as we land. But I can't help but wonder, why did no one else respond to their plea? Why is it only us?" Elena sighed, her face softening. "It's hard to say, Peter. Some people believe it's not worth the risk. Others think they've been abandoned because they're not important enough in the galaxy. But we know differently. No one deserves to suffer alone. It's not just about helping them. It's about doing the right thing." Peter nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I agree. I've seen what disease can do to a community. I just hope we're not too late." The Ark Horizon continued its journey toward Threxia, with each passing hour bringing them closer to the unknown. The crew worked tirelessly, running simulations and preparing for the worst-case scenarios. Commander Harth had made it clear to everyone that the mission might not be easy. They had no idea what they would face when they arrived, but they had to be ready for anything. Back on Earth, the political leaders of the United Earth Alliance were watching closely. They had supported the mission, but that support was conditional. There were murmurs of doubt. Some saw this as a reckless move, one that could provoke the galactic powers who had already chosen to ignore the Threxians' plea for help. Admiral James Moriarty, an influential figure in the UEA, was one of the most vocal critics. "Humanity cannot afford to be seen as weak," he had argued in meetings. "We are still new to this galactic community. If we step in and fail, we risk making ourselves a target. We don't know what we're walking into. Threxia might be more dangerous than we think." Despite the doubts, Elena knew there was no turning back. She had seen firsthand what fear could do to a person, but she had also seen what hope could do. She had heard stories of humanity's resilience, the way they faced adversity head-on, and she believed in that strength. As the Ark Horizon neared Threxia's orbit, Elena gathered her team on the bridge. The time had come. They would land soon, and they needed to be prepared for whatever the planet threw at them. "We're about to enter Threxia's atmosphere," Elena announced, her voice steady and filled with resolve. "I know some of you are nervous, and that's okay. We don't know exactly what we're walking into, but we do know this. We're doing the right thing. We're not here to conquer or invade. We're here to help. Remember that." The crew nodded, their expressions filled with determination. They knew the risks. They knew the stakes, but they also knew that they had to act. If they didn't, who would? As the ship descended through the toxic clouds of Threxia's atmosphere, the crew braced themselves for the challenge ahead. The planet looked desolate from the ship's windows, a world struggling to survive. But beneath the surface, there was still hope. There was still the possibility that they could save a dying world. And that hope rested on their shoulders. The arc horizon touched down on the planet's surface, the engines humming as they powered down. The crew quickly assembled their gear, preparing for the mission. Alina's eyes sparkled with determination as she looked out at the barren landscape before them. The Threxians needed them, and humanity was ready to answer that call. The arc horizon sat quietly on the cracked surface of Threxia. The ground around them was barren and dry, with no sign of the lush greenery the Threxians had once been known for. The sky was a dull orange, tinted by the thick clouds that hung over the planet like a permanent veil. The air was heavy with a toxic mixture, making it clear that the planet had suffered for far too long. Commander Alina Harth stood at the base of the ship, gazing at the desolation that stretched out before her. The wind was calm, but the silence was oppressive, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Behind her, the crew began to unload the necessary equipment, preparing to make contact with the Threxian people. "We're ready, Commander," Lieutenant Peter Grant said, his voice calm but tinged with concern. He adjusted the medical pack on his back. The cure for the plague was in his hands, and it was up to him to administer it to those who needed it most. But we don't know what to expect. The plague might have already wiped out most of them. Alina nodded, her mind racing. She had read the reports. The plague had spread quickly, devastating entire cities in a matter of weeks. Threxia's once thriving population had been decimated, and now the survivors were hiding, afraid to come out into the open. They had no idea if there was even anyone left to help, but humanity had promised to answer their call, and they would not back down now. "We'll find them, Peter," Alina said firmly. "We've come this far, and we're not turning back." With that, the team set out, following the coordinates they had received from the Threxian distress signal. The landscape was eerie, the buildings that once housed the Threxian people now reduced to rubble. There was no sign of life, not even the sound of animals or birds. It was as if the planet itself had been abandoned. As they made their way through the ruins, Dr. Mara Owens, the ship's lead scientist, pulled out a small scanner. "I'm picking up some faint signals," she said, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "It's weak, but it's coming from that direction." Alina gestured for the team to follow, and they quickly made their way toward the source of the signal. The further they walked, the more they saw the damage. Buildings that had once been grand and beautiful were now broken shells. Streets that had been bustling with activity were now empty, save for the occasional piece of debris rolling in the wind. It wasn't long before they reached a small settlement on the outskirts of a ruined city. The buildings here were in slightly better condition, though still damaged by the plague and the devastation that followed. As they approached the settlement, Alina signaled for the team to slow down. They didn't know what to expect, and they needed to be cautious. Suddenly, a figure appeared from behind one of the buildings. It was a Threxian, but weak and frail, stumbling toward them. The creature's skin, which should have been a deep shade of blue, was now a pale gray, and its once bright eyes were dull. It was a female, her movements slow and labored. The team rushed forward, but Alina raised her hand to stop them. She took a step closer to the Threxian, her voice soft. "It's okay. We're here to help." The Threxian looked up at Alina, her eyes filled with both fear and desperation. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Alina knew that this was just one of the many survivors who had been left behind, struggling against the deadly plague that had already taken so much from them. Peter stepped forward, kneeling next to the Threxian. "We've brought a cure," he said, his voice gentle. "It's going to help. We're going to make sure you're safe." The Threxian didn't respond, but her eyes seemed to brighten slightly. She lifted her hand, motioning for them to follow. Slowly, the team moved forward, following the Threxian into a small shelter that had once been a home. Inside, they found a few others, young and old, all sick, all weak. The plague had ravaged them, leaving only the faintest traces of the once vibrant civilization. Mara began to scan the group, quickly assessing their condition. "We have to act fast," she said. "The virus is far worse than we thought. If we don't administer the cure soon, there may not be enough left of them to save." Alina nodded. She turned to Peter, who was already preparing the syringes filled with the antidote. "Let's get to work. We don't have time to waste." As the crew moved swiftly, administering the cure to the survivors, Alina stood at the entrance of the shelter, her mind racing. She had never seen anything like this before. The suffering, the devastation. It was almost too much to bear. But she couldn't stop now. They had to keep going. This wasn't just about helping the Threxians. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. Humanity wasn't afraid to act when others wouldn't. They didn't turn away when a civilization was in need. They stood up, and they fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. After hours of work, the survivors began to show signs of improvement. The color slowly returned to their skin, their eyes brightened, and their breathing became more regular. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start. They weren't too late. As the team finished, Alina stepped outside, her eyes scanning the horizon. The world was broken, yes, but there was still hope. Humanity had made a difference, and for the first time since arriving on Threxia, Alina allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. They had answered the call. They had saved lives. The days following the administration of the cure were tense but hopeful. The survivors of Threxia were beginning to show signs of recovery, and the planet, once on the brink of collapse, seemed to be slowly coming back to life. Alina Harth watched as the crew worked tirelessly to continue helping the Threxians rebuild. Despite the progress, there was an undercurrent of worry that still loomed large over the mission. Alina stood outside the shelter where the Threxian survivors had been treated. The once dead landscape seemed a little brighter now, with small signs of life starting to return. Plants, once wilted and sickly, were beginning to sprout, their colors more vibrant than before. It was a small but significant victory. Yet, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too quiet, too still. Lieutenant Peter Grant approached her, his face serious. "Commander, I just spoke to the remaining Threxian leaders. They're grateful for the cure, but there's something else they're hiding. There's a problem we didn't know about." Alina turned to him, concern flickering in her eyes. "What kind of problem?" Peter hesitated for a moment before responding. "There's been some strange activity near their main city. We've picked up some unusual energy readings, and some of the survivors claim they've seen flashes of light coming from that direction. They think it's a sign of something or someone still out there." Alina's mind raced. The planet was recovering, but if there was a new threat, it could undo all of their hard work. The Threxian people had been through so much already. They couldn't afford to lose the fragile hope they had built. "We need to investigate," Alina said, her voice determined. "We can't let anything threaten what we've just started." With that, the crew gathered their equipment and set out toward the Threxian city. The path was treacherous, the ruins of old buildings littering the landscape like forgotten memories. The air still had a toxic edge to it, and the planet's surface was far from hospitable. But Alina wasn't concerned about the journey itself. It was what they might find at the end of it that worried her. As they approached the outskirts of the city, the energy readings grew stronger. Dr. Mara Owens scanned the area with her portable device, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The source of the energy is definitely coming from the center of the city," she said. "We'll need to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." Alina nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of her sidearm. Even though they had come to help, she knew that the situation could quickly escalate. Threxia had already been a battlefield, and now, it seemed, it might turn into one again. The team continued their trek through the city, moving cautiously through the ruins. There was no sign of life, but the strange energy readings persisted, leading them deeper into the heart of the abandoned city. As they reached a large, crumbling building that appeared to be the center of activity, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air charged with an unsettling tension. "We're close," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever it is, it's right inside." Elena signaled for the team to spread out. They slowly made their way through the broken doors of the building, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The inside was dark, the walls covered in dust and debris, but in the center of the room, something caught their attention. A glowing device, pulsating with an eerie light. "It's some sort of power source," Mara said, her eyes wide with recognition. "But this technology, it's not Threxian. This is something else, something far more advanced." Elena stepped forward cautiously, her hand reaching out toward the device. The moment she touched it, the light around them flickered. Suddenly, a loud hum filled the room, and a voice, deep and otherworldly, echoed through the space. "You should not have come here." The voice sent a chill down Elena's spine. The team froze, every sense heightened as they listened to the strange words. The Threxians had spoken of a dark presence on their planet, but they had never mentioned anything like this. From the shadows of the room, figures began to emerge. They were humanoid, but their skin was pale, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They moved toward the team with a quiet, deliberate pace. Elena's hand instinctively tightened around her weapon. "What are you?" Elena demanded, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "What do you want with Threxia?" The pale figures did not answer immediately. Instead, one of them spoke in the same eerie voice. "We are the descendants of the lost. The Threxians were never meant to thrive. This planet was our prison. You have freed them, but now you will pay the price." Elena's mind raced as the words sank in. These beings were not just another alien race. They were something far older, far more dangerous. And now, they were here, standing between the crew and the Threxians' future. "Commander," Peter said urgently, his eyes wide. "We need to get back to the ship now. This doesn't look like something we can handle with just the crew." Elena nodded, her heart pounding. The planet was far from safe. The new threat had just revealed itself, and the stakes had never been higher. As the figures stepped closer, the team knew one thing for certain. Their mission on Threxia was far from over. Elena's heart raced as she stared at the pale figures that surrounded her and the crew. The room, once silent and eerie, now hummed with a strange, unearthly energy. The pale beings were unlike anything she had ever encountered before. Humanoid, but their appearance was unsettling, almost ghostly. Their glowing eyes locked onto the crew, and the air between them crackled with tension. "We didn't come to harm you," Elena said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear that threatened to take over. "We came to help the Threxians. You don't have to do this." The pale figure who had spoken earlier stepped forward. Its skin was almost translucent, and its voice carried an otherworldly resonance. "Help. The Threxians were never meant to survive. You have awakened us. Now you will face the consequences." The words sent a cold shiver down Elena's spine. These beings were not just another alien race. They were something ancient, something that had been trapped on Threxia long before the Threxians had even arrived. The idea that the planet's history had hidden such a dark secret made her stomach turn. "Who are you?" Elena asked, her hand tightening around her weapon. She wasn't sure if it would help, but she couldn't stand there helplessly. The figure paused for a moment, as if considering her question. Then it spoke again. "We are the remnants of the Arash. We were the rulers of this planet long before the Threxians ever arrived. But we were betrayed, and our enemies imprisoned us here. For centuries, we have been trapped in the depths of Threxia's soil. And now, we are free." The name Arash meant nothing to Elena. It was clear, however, that the Threxians had been wrong about the history of their own world. What they thought they knew about their past was a lie, one that had been buried for generations. "But we didn't know about you," Peter said, stepping forward. "We didn't come here to disturb anything. We only wanted to help the Threxians." The pale figure turned its glowing eyes on Peter, its expression unreadable. "Your ignorance has doomed you. You cannot undo what has been done. The Threxians' existence is a blight on this planet. And now you will help us correct that mistake." Elena felt a knot form in her stomach. She had hoped for peace, for a way to help the Threxians rebuild their world. But now it seemed that their presence on Threxia had only unleashed a far greater danger. "Commander," Dr. Mara Owens whispered urgently, her voice tense, "we need to get out of here. Whatever they are, they're far stronger than anything we've faced before. We're not prepared for this." Elena nodded, her mind racing. Their mission had just taken a dark turn. The Threxians' hope for survival was now threatened by an ancient enemy that had been lurking beneath their feet all along. "Back to the ship now," Elena ordered. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. Every decision, every action from this point on, would have to count. If they didn't act quickly, the Threxians and their team would be lost. The crew began to back toward the door, but as they moved, the Eresh figures blocked their path. Their glowing eyes flickered with menace, and the hum in the air grew louder. It was as if the very building was reacting to their presence, the walls vibrating as though alive. "Where do you think you're going?" the leader of the Arash asked, its voice now laced with a dangerous edge. "You will not leave this place until you understand the truth. You awakened us, and now you will bear witness to the destruction we will bring." Elena's pulse quickened. The threat was real. The Arash were far more than just a mere relic of the past. They were powerful, and they were angry. The Threxians had no idea what they had unknowingly unleashed. And now it was up to Elena and her crew to stop them before it was too late. Mara adjusted the settings on her device, trying to scan the energy levels around them. "Commander, the energy readings are spiking. They're charging something. We need to stop them before they do whatever they're planning." The leader of the Arash smiled darkly, as though it had expected this reaction. "It's too late. You should have never come here." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shook violently. A blinding light filled the room as the Arash activated whatever device they had been guarding. Elena and her team were thrown to the floor as the force of the explosion reverberated throughout the building. The walls cracked and dust filled the air, making it difficult to see. For a moment, there was nothing but chaos. Then, as the dust began to settle, Elena pushed herself up, coughing and disoriented. The crew was scattered around the room, but they were alive, barely. "We need to get to the ship," Elena said, her voice hoarse. "Now." But as she looked around, she realized something even more troubling. The pale figures had vanished. There was no sign of the Arash. And worse, the energy readings had disappeared entirely. It was as if they had been erased from existence, leaving behind only the wreckage they had caused. "Elena," Peter said, his voice strained, "we're not just fighting for the Threxians anymore. We're fighting for everyone. Whatever those things are, they won't stop until they destroy everything." Elena nodded grimly. The battle was far from over. And this time, the enemy they faced was far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. The air was thick with tension as Elena and her crew rushed back toward their ship. The sudden explosion had left them with no time to recover, but there was no choice. Time was running out. As they moved, the ground beneath them trembled, and the distant sound of something heavy shifting echoed through the corridors. The Arash were still out there, and they were getting stronger by the second. "We have to stop them," Mara said, her voice tight with urgency. She looked at her scanner, her eyes widening in fear. "The energy readings are off the charts. If they unleash that power, nothing on this planet will survive." Elena glanced at the rest of the crew. Every face was tense, each person understanding the magnitude of the situation. They had come to Threxia hoping to help the Threxians rebuild, but now they were fighting to save everyone from an enemy that had been hidden for centuries. "We don't have much time," Elena replied, her mind racing. "We need to find a way to disable whatever device they've activated. We can't let them release that kind of power." As they reached the ship's entrance, Peter quickly typed in the access code, but the door refused to open. "It's locked." They must have triggered some sort of security measure. The sound of footsteps behind them made their hearts stop. Elena turned to see two Arish figures slowly advancing toward them, their glowing eyes fixed on the crew. The pale figures moved silently, like shadows in the dim light, their power growing with every step they took. "Get inside now," Elena shouted. The crew scrambled to enter the ship, but one of the Arash reached them first, its hand glowing with an energy that crackled in the air. With a swift motion, it raised its arm, sending a blast of power toward the ship. The energy hit the outer hull with a deafening crash, sending sparks flying everywhere. Inside the ship, alarms began to blare. "Shields are failing," Peter shouted, rushing to the control panel. "They're overriding our systems." Elena knew they didn't have much time to act. They had to fight back, or they would lose everything. "Mara, Peter, can you reroute the power? We need to use the ship's energy to fight them off." Mara nodded, already working on the console. "I'll try to reprogram the shields, but this isn't going to be easy." As the Arash advanced, their forms flickered with dangerous energy. Elena grabbed her weapon, her heart pounding in her chest. They were outnumbered, and the Arash were clearly more powerful than anything they had faced before. But she wasn't about to give up, not when so many lives were at stake. "We need to hold them off for as long as possible," Elena said, her voice steady, but filled with determination. "Don't let them get too close." The Arash were getting closer. Elena took aim and fired a blast at the closest one, but the shot barely made a dent in its ethereal form. The Arash barely seemed to notice, their focus entirely on the crew. Elena's heart sank. If their weapons couldn't even hurt them, what hope did they have of stopping them? "Almost there," Mara called out, her hands moving rapidly over the console. "I've rerouted the power to the energy core. We should be able to channel the ship's weapons into the shields. It's our best shot." Elena gave her a quick nod. "Do it." Mara pressed a final button, and the ship hummed with energy. Suddenly, a barrier of light surrounded the crew, protecting them from the Arash's attacks. The Arash's energy blasts collided with the shields, causing a massive shockwave that sent Elena and the others reeling. "That should hold them for a little while," Mara said, breathing heavily. "But we need to find a way to destroy whatever device they've activated. Otherwise, it's only a matter of time before they break through." Elena nodded. She looked at the faces of her crew. They were all exhausted, but they were not willing to give up. Not yet. "Let's go," Elena said, her voice resolute. "We're not leaving Threxia until we stop this." With the shields up, the crew moved quickly through the ship, heading toward the heart of the facility. The once quiet planet was now a battleground, with every step they took leading them closer to the heart of the Arash's plan. Elena didn't know if they had what it took to defeat the Arash, but she knew one thing for certain: they couldn't let Threxia fall. The sound of distant explosions echoed in the distance, signaling the chaos that was unfolding across the planet. As the crew made their way toward the central chamber, they could hear the hum of the energy device in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. Elena glanced at the others. "We're close. We'll stop them here." But even as she said the words, she knew the battle was far from over. The Arash were not just fighting for control of Threxia. They were fighting for their freedom, for revenge on the world that had imprisoned them for so long. And Elena's team, they were fighting to protect a world that had never even known they existed until now. The central chamber loomed ahead, a large, open space filled with strange alien technology. The air hummed with energy as the crew rushed toward their destination, their minds focused on one goal: stopping the Arash and saving Threxia. The room was bathed in an eerie glow from the massive energy device in the center. It pulsated with power, its core glowing brighter with every passing moment. Elena and her team moved quickly, knowing that the Arash would be on their tail at any second. They had to act fast. "This is it," Elena said, her voice calm but filled with determination. "We need to deactivate the core before it's too late." Mara was already scanning the device, her fingers flying over her portable computer. "The power levels are off the charts. If we don't stop it now, it could destroy the entire planet. We're running out of time." Peter checked his weapon and looked around the room. "The Arash are coming. We won't have much time to make it out after we disable the core." Elena nodded. "We'll make it work. Let's move." The team moved toward the center of the room, where the massive energy core stood. It was surrounded by swirling energy fields, flickering with dangerous power. The entire structure looked unstable, ready to unleash destruction at any moment. "We need to cut off the power supply," Mara said, examining the console next to the device. "But it's protected by a strong energy barrier. I can't access it without disabling the shield first." "That's our task then," Elena said. "Peter, keep an eye on our surroundings. We can't afford any surprises." Peter nodded, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't need to be told twice. The crew knew that they were walking on the edge of a cliff. One wrong move, and they would all be finished. As Mara worked to disable the barrier, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. Elena's heart skipped a beat as she turned to see two Arash warriors entering the room. Their glowing eyes locked onto the crew, and Elena knew there was no turning back now. They had to finish this, or Threxia would be lost forever. The Arash raised their arms, energy crackling in their hands. Without hesitation, Elena fired her weapon, sending a burst of energy toward one of the Arash. But the blast barely slowed the creature down. The Arash were strong, far stronger than they had anticipated. "Mara, hurry," Elena shouted, firing again at the second Arash. She needed to buy them more time. Mara was still working on the console, her hands moving with speed and precision. Almost there, just a few more seconds. The first Arash lunged at Elena, knocking her weapon out of her hands. The force of the impact sent her crashing to the ground. For a moment, the world spun around her. She quickly rolled to her feet, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She couldn't let herself be overwhelmed. Not now. With a swift motion, Elena drew a backup knife from her belt and lunged at the Arash. Her blade struck true, and the creature stumbled back, but it didn't go down. It howled in anger, its energy flaring dangerously. Peter jumped into the fray, using his combat skills to tackle the Arash to the ground. Together, they fought with everything they had. The fate of Threxia, and possibly their lives, depended on it. Meanwhile, Mara worked furiously at the console, her face a mask of concentration. "Got it," she shouted. "The barrier is down. We can disable the core now." Elena didn't waste a second. She ran toward Mara, dodging the Arash's attacks as they clashed with Peter. She reached the console and took over from Mara, her hands flying over the controls. The energy core in the center of the room flared, its light nearly blinding. Elena could feel the heat radiating off it as she tried to lock the shutdown sequence into place. But the core was fighting back, its defenses stronger than anything she had faced before. Come on," Elena muttered under her breath, her fingers trembling with the weight of the moment. The energy blasts from the Arash seemed to come in waves, each one striking closer and closer to their position. "Watch out," Peter shouted. Elena turned just in time to see an energy blast heading toward her. There was no time to dodge. She closed her eyes, bracing for impact, but the blast never came. Mara had stepped in front of her, raising her own energy shield just in time. The blast hit the shield with a violent crash, sending Mara stumbling backward, but the shield held. "We don't have time for this," Elena shouted. She redoubled her focus on the console, determined to finish what they had started. With a final press of a button, the core began to power down. The swirling energy around it slowly started to dissipate, and the room fell eerily silent. The danger was over. The Arash, now realizing they had lost, snarled in frustration. Without their energy core to fuel them, they were no match for the crew. Elena, Peter, and Marek quickly turned to face the remaining Arash. With their weaponry disabled, the Arash no longer had any advantage. One by one, the Arash were subdued, and the crew stood victorious. Phyrexia had been saved. Exhausted but triumphant, Elena looked at her team. "We did it," she said, a small smile crossing her face. "Phyrexia is safe." As the crew prepared to leave the planet and head back to their ship, Elena couldn't help but feel proud. Humanity had made a difference. Against all odds, they had fought for the lives of those who couldn't fight for themselves. And in the end, that was what mattered most.